One thing I've got noted down, Andy, is, and I think you mentioned it earlier, is Brexit and kind of overseas transfers. So what, and again, you say what you can or are allowed to say. How has Brexit impacted your job in terms of who you can bring in? You mentioned obviously you don't have scouts based abroad. Kind of how does that look as a club? And are there limitations to who you can sign? Can you just find someone that's playing in another country and bring them in?
It's made it. I always say it's made it easier and harder.
Mm,
Really, excuse me. In terms of that, because it's given us another filter
mm,
in that sense. For those that don't know the GBE points or the Brexit rules, you need 15 points to automatically qualify to come and play in England. You can go for the exemptions panel at 12 points, and without going into it, really, you get specific points for what league they play in, how many minutes they've played, where that club finished in that league, and several leagues are putting bans, band one, two, three, etc.
mm.
Generally, band one is the big hitting leagues.
Yeah,
The leagues, but unfortunately, players aren't necessarily coming to the championship.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and then you've got band two, which is, to be honest, you're probably more of a market for most championship clubs,
Mm,
which still qualify, still should get 15 points. I think as you go further down the bands, that's where it starts to become
yeah,
tricky.
yeah.
Um, so it rules out a lot of leagues. And when I said it's easier and harder, by that I mean is it almost directs you into certain leagues.
Mm,
Um, but the problem with that is it becomes harder because it's directed the whole of the championship into those leagues.
yeah,
So
yeah.
the pool of the players has got smaller,
Mm,
but now there's a lot of clubs after those players.
yeah,
Um, so it yeah, unfortunately, it's not going to change. So it is what it is, but it's it's made it more interesting. It's like I say, the filter stuff. It's the first thing now. If I get a centre foreign player, or we're at a game and a scout writes about a potential player,
mm,
the first thing I go is check a GBE calculator,
yeah,
uh, which we have one in house, and it's
yeah,
do they qualify, or do they at least make the exemptions panel?
yeah.
If they don't, we won't discard them if they're good enough, but we will put them to one side because
They may
if
be able to qualify in the future or something.
yeah, exactly. If they might then move clubs or make an appearance for the first team or even
Yeah,
make the bench for the first team, their points change and then suddenly they become in play.
yeah,
And that's the tricky thing, really. I think that there are exceptions as you go down the bands. Obviously, if they're internationals, um, specific clubs, and then that all depends on where their FIFA ranking is for an international
yeah,
team.
yeah.
It's quite complicated, but it's certainly made it interesting.
So you know the band of kind of the 12 to 15 or whatever, that one that's kind of negotiable. Is that just a kind of a you've got to argue a case why you think this is okay, or does it go to a panel or what? How
Uh, we haven't done it yet, so my understanding is it goes to a panel, and you have to try and justify of why they should come and play in England, and why they'll be beneficial to come and live in England.
yeah,
And I think you have to try and make a case of that. I think, as I say, we haven't done it. The players or the player that we brought in comfortably qualified, so it's not something we've had to worry about at the moment.
yeah. Okay, that's cool. So then that's kind of your European, your kind of Brexit impact. So when we go kind of further afield, is that what you said about the world ranking? So if you get, let's say you get told about a player that's playing in Argentina, has he got to then hit certain criteria for him to even be able to get a permit to work to come and play in England?
No, it's the same. It's the
Oh, right,
same. They're just done by leagues.
right.
Funny enough, actually, you mentioned Argentina there. It's probably I'm not saying easier. It's just as likely now for someone to sign across the GB a South American based player
Right.
than in certain countries in Europe.
Yeah.
Which I think you've seen it over the last probably 18 months. There's been a couple of South American players signed for England, and I think it's the market's probably only going to get bigger. Logistically, that brings in its own problems, but it's opened up the South American market.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, I mean, Sunderland have we brought in the Costa Rican, so it must if we yeah. And so, how does that link to then the World Cup's coming up? Will you be watching? I know you're not going to be signing the top Brazilians and stuff, but I'm sure there's players that are playing in certain teams that would be definitely achievable for QPR to sign it. Are you got presence in terms of watching those games? Do you have scouts on hand to do reports on certain players?
Yeah, we won't be going. Well, I won't be going to the World Cup. But in terms of that, but there are certain countries we will be keeping an eye on. Just I mentioned it earlier, they might play in lower leagues, but they are going to the World Cup, so that classes as a band one competition. So
yeah,
their points will jump dramatically. And then obviously I would imagine tip most of them over the 15 points mark. So there are countries we will be keeping an eye on. It will be mainly from video, obviously from a logistical point of view. There isn't going to be many countries we trying to sign players from or want to sign players from, but so it's logistically and financially it's not very viable for us to take off to Qatar and watch the World Cup. So a lot of it will be done video, and then if we wanted to pursue that when they come closer to home, if you like, back into their respective leagues, then it'll be something we'll pick up live.
Yeah, sure.